Good afternoon, everybody. Since morning, we've been actually listening to a lot of experts on nuclear energy, listening to what is wrong with nuclear energy, why we should not have it, and all of that. I am here to talk a little not on particularly on nuclear energy because we've heard so much around it. I'd like to share with you a little more around what happens when people start, when we hold a conference like this. What happens? What happens when you have an opinion that does not coincide with the opinion of the government? But before I go into that, the current government, when it came into power, the slogan that was very much touted during the pre-election campaigns was this "Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas" slogan. And today, down the lane, we know whose development and who's the government taking with it in this whole journey, in its journey, basically. We know that the government takes with it the corporates, the bureaucrats, and people within its system who are corrupted. And when we talk about development, we definitely know it's not the development of the people of this country. It is, of course, the development of corporates who are both Indian as well as beyond the boundaries of this country. And one of the things that was also discussed in the morning was the whole thing of energy access and inequity in distribution of energy. We spoke about a lot of aspects, but one of the aspects that I'd also like to share here is the fact that when energy gets produced, I work in a region, I don't work on nuclear per se, but as Greenpeace, we do work on nuclear, but I particularly work on coal. And I work in a district that has got 11 mines and 9 thermal power plants. It produces 10% of the total coal-based energy of the country. But in the villages where we work, where there was a fight against a mine, we hardly had energy. So it's a region that produces 10% of the energy of the country that gets siphoned off to industry and to cities, basically. And we keep on producing more energy, not just from coal, but nuclear and other dangerous sources. And we continue to hide behind the whole explanation of, oh, we do not have access to energy, and that's the reason we want to continue to produce energy. So this whole thing of cities and industries, energy getting siphoned off to cities and industries, and of course, linking it with our lifestyles. The other thing is also this whole Make in India thing that the government has championed brought in, basically. And in a country where more than 80% of the occupation of the people in our country is a natural resource based occupation. People are either engaged in agriculture, or they are engaged in fisheries, or they are engaged in forestry. This is the occupational base of the people of our country. In a country like this, we are inviting people to come and set up projects using plundering, selling off our natural resources. So that is also something that we need to talk about. When we were talking about nuclear secrecy, I just wanted to share some information that Greenpeace acquired on Jaitapur through an RTI some time ago. So this, which will again show more light on this whole aspect of secrecy and non-transparency, which is being spoken about so much here. We had filed an RTI on the whole the Jaitapur clearances. And what we fell upon, of course, we didn't get copies of the information, but we were allowed to do file inspections by NPCIL. And what we got to know was this, that NPCIL had commissioned a report in 2002, which was ready in 2006, a GIS, Geological Surveys of India report, which was to look at basically the seismicity of the Jaitapur region. And this report clearly, which was completed in 2006, clearly shows that there are 16 fault lines in the whole Jaitapur region, the project site. And since 2006, when the report was completed, this report has been kept under review. It's been under review from 2006 to date, which is 10 years. 10 long years, a report is being reviewed. It's not being put out in the public domain. And there are no reasons given for why it's not being put up. But we know what the reasons are. The report has information which should be taken into account according to the AERB guidelines, and clearance should not be given to the Jaitapur, or the Jaitapur project should be scrapped. But this is the information that NPCIL and the government wants to keep away from us. The fact that there are 6 fault lines within a 5-kilometer radius of Jaitapur. This is exactly what the NPCIL doesn't want, for the public of the region, people of the region to know. So this kind of secrecy, this kind of non-transparency by the NPCIL is basically aimed at actually, they keep information from people when people have every right. They're bringing in their backyard a technology that's so dangerous. We've been hearing from morning, we've been seeing photographs which we couldn't, like, you could just look at and then maybe turn your eyes off. You couldn't watch it for more than 10 seconds kind of photographs. And when you are selling this kind of technology to us, you don't give us information, you keep information away from us. So this is the kind of secrecy that's there in the nuclear industry. Coming on to the whole issue of dissent and democracy. So everywhere, like in every place where there have been people or communities who've been standing up and questioning the government on transparency, on the dangers of nuclear, on the dangers of the technology that is being brought into this country, on the rationale of bringing in this technology which is not cost effective, people have been hounded by the government. And this is not just by the current government, also by the earlier government. We all know that the IB report was commissioned by the UPA, though the current government used it against a lot of people. So the current government, when it came into power, they basically defined a new kind of a security challenge. So this is a little different from the challenge that the country apparently faced from terrorists and other kind of law and order situations. This is called the national economic security, and anybody who breaches the national economic security is also booked under charges of sedition, and they are tried for they're branded as anti-nationals. So this whole thing, where of course there is a public narrative that is built, a very popular public narrative is built against each individual who just happens to have a different opinion, or brings out some RTI information and wants to share it with a larger public or with people. They are being hounded using this whole thing of national economic security. So that is something I think we need to also be very, very aware of. How this in this whole scheme of things, how rights guaranteed under the Constitution are being violated, how nationalism is being defined, patriotism is being defined, anti-nationalism is being defined in this country today. And we cannot talk about nuclear and say we don't want to talk about any of these issues, because every person sitting in this room who's working on nuclear, there is Uday Kumar, who's of course there, and there is Vaishali, everybody. Of course, there are people from Gorakhpur here, everybody. I think everybody who's tried to raise their voice, who tried to bring in the same argument out, has been targeted by this government. So this whole thing of building a public narrative against you, where the larger mass starts feeling, oh, you are actually doing something against the interests of the country. When what is actually happening, we've been hearing from morning, what is actually happening? What is it? Whose interests are being co-opted? Whose interests are at stake? This we've been hearing from the morning. But what is the public narrative? What does the primetime news channel discuss? What is it? So every person whether you're a student, whether you're a doctor or lawyer, a middle class person sitting out there is sold a very, very definitive narrative that, oh, this hue and cry that is being raised by a bunch of people against nuclear is just because they want to stop development in this country. They want to stop economic development of this country. So that narrative which is being sold and unfortunately is being bought by a lot of people. That is a huge, huge concern. Nobody is questioning it. Everybody who listens to this narrative says, oh yes, there is something wrong. So that is something I think we as citizens of this country need to really think about. Not just the whole thing of painting people, putting sedition charges on them and all of that. There's also this thing of how the state machinery gets very effectively used to promote the ends of corporates in this country. I think Uday Kumar could tell you much, much better on how the state machinery has been used. Vaishali could tell you better how the state machinery has been used to, suppress their fight. So I can tell you from our experience in the Mahan forest in Madhya Pradesh. I've studied law for 7 years of my life. But the 5 years that I spent in Mahan fighting against a corporate, I've never been, we were unsuccessful in getting a single FIR filed in a police station. Instead, we've had false cases, being charged on us. So how the whole criminal judicial system of the country is being co-opted and used to promote this kind of hooliganism in the name of nationalism in this country is something that we also should become more and more aware of, I think. The large number of cases. So this is also a strategy which is very effectively used by governments, not just by our government, but governments across the globe use this as a big strategy. There's this thing of slap suits, which is basically it's a strategic litigation which prevents people from participate. It's something that prevents you from participating on matters of national interest or public interest, basically. So these litigations are false cases that are slapped on individuals or communities that try to raise issues about, say, a nuclear power plant that is coming in their backyard, or a coal-based power plant, or whatever, or when resources are being taken away from there. These civil as well as criminal suits are used to kind of tire out fights. And this you can see in the long run. What happens is, if I am somebody who's been working on rights of communities, or if there are a bunch of communities fighting for their own rights, when you slap multiple cases in different parts of the country in different courts, what happens is that the time and energy, which is of course the motivation, the energy and time and resources, both human as well as financial resources of these communities, get siphoned off or diverted in defending themselves against these false cases. It gets tiring. So in the long run, what happens is the state agencies are very effectively able to divert whatever your energy you would have used in fighting your own rights or challenging the state on what it is doing wrong. You have to, in the end, divert to save yourself from these false cases. And when it happens over a period, it tires you down. Your motivation levels go down. So this is a very well thought out strategy. One is, of course, building a public narrative against people, communities, fights, and then, discrediting you in the public eye, and then slapping you with a series of false cases which demoralize you, which require you to siphon your resources into these legal battles, which are totally. So this is again. So when we talk about nuclear energy, when we talk about militarization and peace and all these issues, we have to be very, very aware about these challenges that communities who are trying to talk about their own challenges, or who are demanding their own rights as guaranteed under the Constitution, are facing today in the country. Because without knowing these challenges, without trying to understand this, we will never challenge the narrative that is being pushed through the media into the public sphere. And as long as we don't challenge that narrative, the win for the government and the corporates is this narrative, where they are able to happily paint Uday Kumar saying that, oh, he's anti-national because he's opposed a nuclear power plant. So I'd like us to also think about some of these challenges, and especially when we sit before television channels or we open our newspapers and we read a lot of these kind of cases, it will be good for us to also always remember that there is another side of the story. There is a proactive narration that is being built, which is used to discredit people. There is a big challenge wherein the whole state machinery is co-opted, the whole judiciary or the whole judicial system is being co-opted and used by corporates to, curb dissent in our democratic space. Thank you.